Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sales Uncharted. Now, I promised my B2B sellers that every time I'm going to bring someone that comes from, I would say, uncharted territory, right? Let's not bring people that are typical VP of sales and they tell us about technique and they start talking about mindset and they talk about how to do sales coaching. You have enough of that. What I wanted to do though is that I actually bumped into Jason Safford or Coach J. And Coach J has this really unique profile that really resonated with me. He talks about resilience. He talks about some very interesting approaches to crisis and how you use crisis to build yourself under constant pressure. And as I was thinking about Jason, guess what? I think he thought about me and he actually was kind enough to send me an ebook of his book. I must be honest, Jason, 500 and I think there's 540 pages of absolute fun. And he uses these zingers. And I said, you know what? This is interesting. I would love to have him on board. And I actually went and I bought the book as well because I really did want to keep a copy of that book. And Jason, for the simple reason, and my wife agrees with me, is that if we are traveling and we come under attack, I can use your thick 500-page book to beat the life out of the person attacking me, right? So at least there's some good use to it. It's good kind, sir. Now, B2B sellers, Coach, could you take a minute or two and give us a background as to your journey? What is it that you do? How do you make your living? And why did you write this book that we're going to talk about a bit more?
Absolutely, Deepak. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be on your show, first of all, and being invited by you. The privilege of being able to write the book comes from a long background as an entrepreneur, over 30 years, in which I've built several companies and I've built several sales processes myself, working with lots of different teams, starting in environmental real estate of all places. And one of the things that I always try to explain to people is that I started selling solar in 2001. And if you can imagine what the landscape was like back then, that's one of the real opportunities and privileges I had for both learning sales as well as learning resilience. The book, Win Your Day, is a blueprint specifically based on what I call resilience architecture. This is methodology that I created, and it's a holistic way of looking at yourself from 5 pillars: emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical, and creative. Now, the way that I explain it to a lot of people from my background is that in addition to being an entrepreneur in business, I was also a fitness coach. I started, 30 years ago as an athlete in college and became a personal trainer out of college and had many very unique clients that gave me the opportunity to be exposed to a lot of different areas of fitness, including pro athletes. And that opportunity allowed me to understand that resilience is something that really starts from the physical modality. And it really is something where every time you think about it, when you fall and you pick yourself back up and keep moving forward, that is one of the main ways that we think of resilience. But it goes far beyond that. Because when you think about it from that same aspect in terms of your emotional crisis and falling and picking yourself back up, or your spiritual crisis and falling and picking yourself back up, collapse happens in every one of those 5 modalities, those 5 pillars. And the ability to understand and reprogram yourself and get better is what the book is all about. And so going into it from the standpoint of your audience and sales, what I approached that book with was my own understanding of other leaders that we now look at with, total, awe.
I think you spoke about Mandela and a few other in the book as well.
Yes. And we don't take to heart the fact that every one of these people had challenges that they had to overcome that made them who they became. And it's in those crises that people have the opportunity to really evaluate themselves and say, who do I want to be on the other side of this crisis?
Sure.
And that's really what it's about, is looking at crisis as an opportunity. Yeah.
So I'm going to now unpack a lot of stuff you've said there, because I really want the B2B sellers to start latching onto some key points that you raised over there that I want to dig into, right? One of the lines that was in the book that just boom leaped out at me, and I actually would recommend B2B sellers to take it, put it on a t-shirt, but don't send you the copyright money and stuff. Crisis is not the end of you, it's the beginning written in fire, right? Now, when I first read that, it sounded like one of those WWE moments, right? Crisis is not the end of you, it is the beginning written in fire. But I stood there for a second, because I realized when I was in sales, and Jason, I'm very grateful that you raised a very important point here, right? So Coach Jay is known as an investor, Coach Jay is a senior entrepreneur, but people don't realize that he actually connected something very powerful. All entrepreneurs are sellers. They don't call themselves, but they not need to sell, because if you can't sell, you won't survive.
You'll never be in business.
Yep. So absolutely. So I think when you gave your preamble, it gave me comfort and solace that, one, we acknowledge selling as a key fundamental competence, and that I think you're the right person to talk about it, given your background, Coach Jay. So Coach Jay, I'm a salesperson, right? And I got this scenario where the pressure is hitting me now, right? And you said that crisis is not chaos, it's construction. Now that's interesting, right? Because one of my favorite lines is that every failure is a data point, and just use it to understand and course correct. So for a Lean Six Sigma guy like me, right, who's a process guy, that made a lot of sense. Because at the end of the day, the word construction, I have to assume, is not physical construction. This is about structure, about some scaffolding that puts things together. Do you want to tell me what exactly this means when pressure is hitting me? I'd like to understand. Now, you spoke about the 5 pillars, or 5, what would you call it? 5, I don't want to call it pillars.
I call them 5 pillars, yeah.
You do? Okay, perfect. Then let's stick with pillars then, okay? So what and how would you talk about this? When does this construction work? What happens during a crisis? What would a salesperson be thinking about? And how would you then kind of unravel this for me to understand what is this resilience architecture that you talk about?
It's a great question. And, thank you for the opportunity to answer it. So I want to start with the idea of collapse. And all of us have these moments where we collapse. It could be at any point in the day based on overwhelm, or getting a call that you didn't expect that just totally devastates you. There's anything that could happen that causes collapse. And the reality is that collapse can begin the narrative instead of sealing it. I want you to think of doorways hidden inside of ruins, and crisis being an opportunity. So when pressure hits, what's really being built is architecture, your next level of self-command. And pressure strips titles, comfort, and disguise until only the truth is left standing. And that's what I call resilience architecture. It's not mystical. It's an internal system that survives the fire, as you mentioned before, the total chaos, the fire that you're going through. So your identity, your rhythm, your laws, and your rituals, that's what comes out of this. So I'm going to use an example from the book. In the first chapter, Theodore Roosevelt, who is really the model of resilience architecture in a lot of ways, because he embodies the universal law of cause and effect. Roosevelt didn't just endure asthma or loss. He forged rhythm in it, where it became how he went forward. He looked for confrontation. Every breath was a rep in the furnace. That's why I say crisis is an engineer. It clears rot and rebuilds your frame, so you become forged as the stronger, more powerful version of you.
Jason, what's really astounding for me when I was going through the book also was the reality that, everyone looks at a crisis as an intervention with negative consequences, right? But the way you wrote about it, I think you just used, I think you used a different word, but for me, I was thinking, well, if crisis was an architecture, right? And it now collapses or something happens, right? A crisis comes and it actually reveals what you never built underneath as well. So instead of ruminating about it, you now get an opportunity. So it's like preparing for an examination, right, Jason? We run out of time, so we choose 5 or 6 chapters out of 10, and we go and we take a chance. And to me, That's when you go, you see the examination paper and actually realize what you did not prepare for. So now you know how to go back and course correct for the future. That to me was very, very interesting, because now what you're telling people is that rather than having a crisis and getting into an identity freeze, identity situation, we are going to separate the two, and we're going to actually use this to actually reveal how to become better people out of that. So that forging from fire and stuff. That's when I said, you know what, this is really getting interesting for me. What I want to do though is I want to just kind of dial in a bit further there, because you seem to be someone that's tracking historical figures, and you've chosen your victims very well indeed. Especially, I don't know if you're aware, but Jason, I lived in South Africa for 15 years. So seeing Nelson Mandela, and there was right, and I think Oprah was also in the book, if I recall, right?
That's correct.
Now, let's talk about salespeople, right?
Mhm.
I'm a salesperson, and I am now feeling a collapse, right? Typically, if you ask a salesperson what a collapse is, I promise you, Jason, you're going to smile when I say this. Do you know what they tell me? I didn't make my quota. My boss told me I'm
Right.
on a performance improvement plan. And I'm like, that's your definition of collapse? Oh, very interesting. Here's a question for you, Jason. That definition is very outcomes driven, right? But something has to happen earlier, right? That can predicate or tell you that this collapse is coming or is imminent. How would you tell me, how does a collapse announce or does not announce itself? How does that work?
That's a great question. And again, I'm grateful that you ask, because that's one of the big things about the value of the book to the reader, is that you have the opportunity in every chapter to look at the tools and the questions, for reflection, to kind of look at yourself. So for example, you asked, how does it show up? How does collapse
Yes,
really identify itself?
absolutely.
And one
Yeah.
of the first things that people don't realize is how they breathe. So when you're in crisis, when collapse is coming, you actually start breathing shorter. Everything gets tighter. Your body is no longer in flow. Your body is no longer loose, and you can see it in the person's face. One of the best ways to identify this is with somebody who's about to speak in front of a group of people, because
Yes,
we know that the number one fear of all
exactly.
human beings is public speaking.
Yes.
So when you look at the speaker and you see how they might suddenly tense up, they're having a mini collapse at that moment. And when those first words come out of their mouth, oftentimes there's a stutter or a weakness, because they aren't sure of their own voice until they hear it. And then once they get going, you see the collapse overcome by, okay, I can do this, and they start speaking to themselves, and they may regain their frame, or they may stammer through it and
True.
have difficulty
Yes.
getting all the way to the end, because they're going down this landslide of emotions and nervousness that they can't overcome. So the breath is the first thing that you could identify in terms of collapse. But then there are physical things, the palm sweating, the shaking, all of these things that the reality is the person who's experiencing them will only recognize and be aware to them if they learn to pause before they get into it. Because that's the thing about crisis that we fail to recognize, is that, and the idea behind resilience architecture is that it's giving you the tools and the tactics to be able to pause and recognize, okay, I'm going into crisis. How do I want to deal with this? What do I want to come out of this crisis? How do I want to reframe myself so that I can come out better?
Yes.
Because to the point of the speaker who may start very unsure of themselves, the person who regains their footing and finishes very strong in terms of whatever it is that they were speaking about was able to positively reframe and have that architecture where they said, okay, I may not know how I'm going to start, but I know how I'm going to end. I
And
know where I want to be. And
so,
that's a big part of it.
but Jason, wait. There's so much happening here, right? So I'm a coach. And when we talk to people, and particularly salespeople, right? What is really interesting is that salespeople are taught that pause is a great technique, right? We tell them that when a customer is talking and he gives you a question, don't jump to an answer. Pause, gather your thoughts, collect yourself. It may seem like an eternity, but it's actually just 1 or 2 seconds. That's all you need. The customer says, the classic price objection, right, Jason? Wow, sticker shock, mate. I saw this price. I think that's way over our budget. First reaction, I'm going to lose the deal. I'm going to lose the deal. I'm going to lose the deal. Pause. And I think that's what I was just listening to. And I actually realized when you were talking, I actually realized that we talk about emotional leakage. That's going to be the first thing you're going to see. And those emotions are going to come manifest themselves in physical ways. Your mind going right, your throat, your tongue, mouth being dry, your hands being sweaty. And there's also something you said, Jason, which I want to remind each and every B2B seller. And I've always said this to them. The rock star sellers that go to the top are the most self-aware. And one of the tricks I have learned very early, Jason, was that, I used to realize that there's certain things that trigger me, right? I know that word I don't like personally, Jason, but it's very valuable word. Because for me, a glass of cold water during a meeting, taking a sip actually calms me down. And it's a little trick I learned, which shocked me. When I have a deal loss, I actually go get a glass of cold water with ice in it. I just sit down, I sip slowly, and I kid you not, holding it under my tongue works my wonders for me. Awareness is not necessarily about, and there's one thing that Americans do a lot, Jason. I just want to call it out to you, that the rah rah bro culture, right? Now here you come along talking about this simple truths, and a lot of people get very nervous because salespeople, and I'll be honest with you, the top 3 or 4 trainers in the US that are making the multi-million dollar, stage gig are what I would say the extremely, let's pump iron, let's go up there and like, you screwed up. Of course you lost the deal because your mind's not in it.
Mm-hmm.
And coach, I just cannot see you doing that. So I think that makes your message valuable, right? And I think this is a caution to the B2B seller community. We are so hyped up. And I always tell them, when you get your juices pumped up, that's for the moment. It's like a Red Bull. You get that high. When that high crashes, you're going to take the wrong decisions. What are you going to do about it? And I think this is why these resilience architecture and frameworks. And a lot of people, look, I'll be honest with you, Jason. Coach, 20 years ago, if you came to me, I would have looked at you and said to you, whatever, I'll just have 2 Diet Cokes, skip a meal and 2 cigarettes, and I will do it, baby, because hustle is awesome, right? And that was a shocker for me. As you age and as you actually listen to and talk to people and you see the people rising to the top, I think, Jason, your message is very, very profound in that aspect. I like the pause angle. And sorry, I broke that with the train of thought for you, but I'm going to move on. Let's keep talking about salespeople because I'm getting excited. So salespeople always live in constant micro crises, right? And here's a simple one. Oh, no, I lost my deal, boss. Okay. Oh, no, Andrew lost his deal. So now my boss, Peter, wants me to help Andrew improve his pipeline. It's like never ending. And now Andrew doesn't get his deal and the overall team doesn't make a number. Now you feel guilty for that also. Your constant micro crisis, you just like, it's a life destined to bounce from greatness down, absolution, retribution of what is going on, redemption. I don't know. So when you see people, I think you use the word fracturing, right? And I just want to understand you, what is that internal signal that you typically see or would caution people to look for when you see someone starting to fracture?
Yeah, that's a great question again. And I want to use your example of Andrew and his boss and the challenge that happens when somebody feels that emotion to losing the deal.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talk about in the book, or that is important in the book, is the winning formula. And the winning formula is very, very simple. You actually talked about 20 years ago, your hustle and your grit would solve everything. And that's the first part of the formula, which is effort. Okay. But the formula goes beyond that to look at what is real completion. And completion doesn't necessarily mean that you get the win at that moment. It means that you did the task.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So there's the effort and the ability to complete the task. And then the 2 areas that people fail all the time to add to this formula are recovery and awareness. Okay. And the awareness is exactly what you're talking about, is a lack of awareness to yourself as well as the greater situation, which is that deal that you may have lost today isn't necessarily gone forever. It's a matter of recalibrating and looking at it and saying, okay, you know what? I have to put that deal to next quarter. I have to rebuild that relationship with that person better, because apparently somewhere in the context of what we were talking about, I missed something and I've got to reevaluate how I'm connecting with that sales lead? What am I learning from it? So now you look at recovery, not just in terms of yourself making the next deal, but recovery in
But
terms of learning from
yes,
that specific deal and then reapplying it to that person later on. Because one thing you and I know about sales is that a no only means no for today. You can
yes.
always go back to them the next day or the next week or the next month or the next year, and eventually they may sign with you.
So let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Here's my recall of this winning formula discussion that you just had. And I know a lot of people tell me, but Deepak, I don't listen to your podcast for mathematics. It's not mathematics, ladies and gentlemen. It's just very simple. It's compounding of specific attributes, right? Effort multiplied by completion, multiplied by recovery, multiplied by awareness, right? Question for you. If you think about the selling function, right? You're saying that winning equals this complex diagram that you see here. Would you say that any one of those is more important than the other? Or Jason, would you say they're all equal in this equation, particularly from a sales B2B lens? How would you position that?
In my experience and how I teach it and how I apply it for other people is that they're all equal. It's
Right.
where we
Okay.
focus our attention. So 99% of all salespeople, only the top 1% do not focus on effort being the most important thing. In other words,
Oh, no.
99% of us put 80 to 90% of our focus on effort. And so therefore completion, recovery, and awareness get very little attention.
Yes.
It's only the top salespeople who have been experienced and know there's only so much effort you need to apply. It's actually about the task, the awareness, and recovery, because you can't expect that you're going to get 100% sales completion all the time, right?
Yep.
And if your focus is less on the effort of winning the sale and more on the overall format with which you go about each sale and developing the relationship the right way and making sure you're aware to what your customers really talking about and listening in, that active listening component, which is the awareness.
Which is the awareness, correct? Yeah.
The more you are focusing on that awareness to what your customers really saying, the prospects really saying, it allows you to then recover even within the conversation. So you may have had a plan for how that sale was going to go, and you listen and you hear what they're saying, and suddenly you're like, wait a second, I need to pivot and look at this differently to see if I can give them something that they want right now that may not be what I was trying to sell them,
Yeah.
but rather give them what they're looking for. And in that, they're then opening up to receive what it is that I'm offering to them as well.
So I'm going to give you my interpretation and help me with this one.
Yeah.
I respect the fact that you are fighting for equal weightage because that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also acknowledging that 99% of the guys are spending 99% of the time, maybe, right, on effort. If you build it, they will come, right? I sometimes watch this. Here's the one thing that shocked me about myself. And Jason, I think I discovered that only the last 20 years. And as I coach rockstar salespeople, I actually realize the top 1%, as you mentioned, Jason, they actually respect recovery. I was stunned by that. They actually define recovery as not just their emotional well-being or the physical well-being, but down to even what food am I eating and at what time am I eating it? Because some of the top guys actually told me, if I skip meals, I know I make bad judgment calls. Now you would say that sounds so, why would I pay $500 to someone to get that advice, right? And here's the fun part, right? And my wife, on her t-shirt, she just has one t-shirt that she says I should wear all the time. Common sense is fairly uncommon. And I think that's what's happening. And in a TLDR world, we actually need people to actually understand what the ancients told us. And I like the fact that you, Jason, bring in spirituality also into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a religious guy, but I respect people who are religious for the simple reason that I am a spiritual guy. My channels are different in how I express myself, right, Jason?
Yeah.
And I think religion conflates things sometimes, but spirituality, I would think, keeps us human. Now, I'm enjoying this. I'm going to pivot with you. So, okay, you and I agree. Effort is consuming salespeople's time. I get that, right? Now,
Mhm.
how is a question for you then? So, how do you define completion in a way that actually changes outcomes, not just the sense of effort and busyness? Two diet cokes, let's keep going. How finishing matters more? You say. Tell me a bit
Yeah,
more on that.
it's a great question. And this is going to sound very funny, but because of my fitness background,
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of clients that come with an intention to either lose an enormous amount of weight or gain an enormous amount of strength. And their ideas in their mind are nearly impossible to achieve in reality.
In
They,
reality.
it's your eyes are bigger than your stomach. As they say, a lot of in a lot
Yeah.
of different ways.
Yes.
And it's the same thing in sales. You have to look at it in terms of what can you actually do. And in the gym, the beauty is, and this is a saying that I use all the time, is that the gym is the one place where failure is the goal. And if we
It's
now
really
pivot
interesting.
that,
Yes. Yes.
if we,
Spot on, Jason. Yes,
yes,
I just it hit the metaphor got to me. I'm not a big gym guy, but you're absolutely right.
yeah,
You work till the muscle weakens or breaks, right? You
that's
push until
exactly
you
right.
can't push anymore, and when you go recover, that's when that muscle comes back. Sleep helps in that also. And again, it sounds like a physical metaphor, but actually can be a very emotional understanding as well for people, right? Recovery and stuff like that.
That's exactly right. So if we look at completion as the challenge of doing as many reps as possible till you get so good at doing that fundamental exercise within your day, of whether it's doing outreach or it's doing, follow-up emails, or it's reaching out to, past contacts, whatever that task is, you do it until exhaustion. And then the recovery, this is the interesting point to your your statement before in terms of spirituality. Oftentimes most people look at the completion of that as the opportunity to go out and do something destructive to yourself, like going and having a drink,
Yes, that's
and
really
and
interesting you say that.
celebrating
Yes.
in a non-valuable way. But if you pivot that to now saying, okay, I'm going to do this to exhaustion, and now I'm going to do something to replenish my spirit, replenish my emotion, or go take a walk and do something physically active to move your body in a positive way, that's where the recovery fits in more effectively.
Yes. Jason, you know what's really interesting is that, I mean, I've traveled the world and I've worked in various cultures, right? And one thing that I always used to tell salespeople is that this is the only group of people that I've worked with where you win a deal, you go for a drink. You lose a deal, you
Mhm.
go for a drink. And I'm like, should we be changing the pattern and doing something else, guys? But anyway,
Right.
I'm going to pivot here because when I was looking at the book, you talk about a personal operating system, right? POS.
Yeah.
Now, when I first saw POS, I was like, okay, wait, surely he's not talking about what I think he's talking about, a piece of something, right? But then I actually realized, a personal operating system is very powerful. But you also spoke about installing a resilience OS, right?
Yeah.
Let's challenge you a bit on that. So I'm a sales manager and I got
Mhm.
a team of 15, 20 people that report to me, work with me, right? And you
Mhm.
walk in and you say, guys, I'm going to help you with the resilience OS. And I'm standing there trying to figure out, oh, what? Jason, what components would you start with dealing with a manager that's trying to figure out a 15 to 20% sales organization? Because you do say systems transmit strength, ritual replaces excuse. Love this, but help structure this for me so that a salesperson or a sales leader listening says, okay, now I understand what resilience OS can do for me and my team, and what would those building blocks look like, sir?
Deepak, again, I'm so grateful for you asking this question, because it allows me the opportunity to share something that, although you read it in the book and you get the ideas, I now get to share a personal story with you.
Bring
So
you go
my
for it.
my first real paid sales job, where I wasn't an entrepreneur or anything else, I went to work for somebody else as a salesperson, was selling encyclopedias. And the reason I share this story is because what they did really, really well was recognize that a kid in college trying to sell encyclopedias needs an enormous amount of training. And that training has to be done over and over, because just giving them a manual and saying, read this and come back and sell me a set of encyclopedias is not going to work. And again, encyclopedias today is something that most people don't even know what I'm talking about, but a set of
I assure you, you're absolutely spot on. The 15, 20 years old are going to look at us funny, but yes.
That's right. But the point behind this, obsolete technology that I was selling was that it was an enormous lift physically. You didn't take a box of encyclopedias to try and sell it. You had to convince the person based on who you were, standing in front of them, and say why they wanted this box of books on their shelf. In that experience of being trained, I was given a certain number of tools that I took with me going forward. And in every organization I worked with, and every entrepreneur I worked with, and every founder I worked with, what I looked for was, did they have an operating system like this organization installed in me? And the answer is no, obviously, because most people just get up, pound down a couple of, cups of coffee and a little bit of breakfast, go to work for the day, and Diet Coke. And at some point they realize they're hungry, and they, fill themselves up again, and they go back at it. And at the end of the day, they have no closure to what they did for that entire day. And they go at it the next day, and they just keep going at it until they have results. And then at that point, they have results and they don't even know what they have. So there's chaos. So in telling you that story, I want to go back to what you asked in terms of that leader of the 15-person organization. And I would say to him that the fish stinks from the head down.
Ooh, spot on.
And that is to let them understand that as the leader of this organization, everybody's looking at you and what you're doing. How are you modeling success? And if there's no structure, if there's no routine, if there's no dashboard that, people can sort of go to throughout the day and see what you're doing, they're simply going to follow chaos. So the resilience operating system is basically creating a structure that provides a morning ignition, a midday calibration, and an evening close. And in the book, one of those examples is a tool called the resilient order loop. And it's simply a daily rhythm that makes chaos predictable, so that the leader knows they're going to have fires every day. And there's a way in which they handle those fires at a certain time of day in a certain way that their team can follow that lead and go forward.
So Jason, you're a frameworks guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
POS, ROS. And I think you just spoke about something else, and you have 5 pillars. I have a question for you. It's nearly 9 a.m. in the morning, and I'm a seller, and I've been like psyched up. Got to make my first cold call. Let's get prospecting, baby. Let's get 7 no's so that the 8th sucker buys, right? Something like that to psych you up. How would you apply the GAS framework in that context? Because I think the people on this call need to understand. I like the book because of these snappy frameworks that come out, right? There's not a lot of interrogation that needs to happen. You're also not asking for a lot of faith, which is very interesting. Sometimes you say, trust me, therefore, or trust me, I've seen it happen before, but will it happen for me? I don't know, but trust it may happen. Anyway, tell me a bit more about GAS and how that fits in.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for the privilege to be able to share this, because I think for your readers and listeners, this is one of the most valuable aspects of the book. So GAS stands for gratitude, affirmation, and structure.
Oh, I made my own little mess there. Yeah.
That's okay, because again, the objective is not the words. The objective is to understand it exactly like you said, as GAS, how you fuel yourself in the morning to get through the day with enough energy and excitement and value. So I chose gratitude, affirmation, and structure because one of the things that I've learned, and again, this is how you elevate yourself both as an entrepreneur and as a salesperson, is you learn to operate from gratitude first. The ability to have the privilege
Yeah.
to share yourself with somebody and present them with an offer is something you have to be grateful for, because again, it could not happen. You could be, not having that opportunity. And so therefore, always having the gratitude to start the day and just being able to say to yourself, I'm grateful for being able to wake up and appreciate this day with love in my heart, is something you can write down, and it changes your entire focus for the day. Okay. Now, affirmation is something that simply is a statement that validates yourself. So let's use it in terms of a sales meeting. When you
Yep.
write down, I decide the pace, you are basically affirming to yourself that you're in control of this meeting. I decide the pace of how this meeting goes. And that's an affirmation that now allows you to go into that meeting with confidence and command that the other person is looking for from you.
Yep.
Now, here's the final part, the structure, which I use as a SMART goal. Okay. Now, going back to our previous segment where we talked about the fact that salespeople tend to celebrate with alcohol or something destructive. Okay.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Let's change that structure into something positive with a simple SMART goal that says, I plan to win a deal by the end of today,
By the end of today.
which will allow me to go take a walk and enjoy the rest of the day. Something as simple as that can be a SMART goal that now resets you in focus in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So now your celebration isn't about going out and taking your mind off everything from the standpoint of having a drink, but going out and doing something constructive for yourself where, yes, you still get to take your mind off everything, but you're doing it as a reward to yourself for what you achieved.
So, Jason, I just want to make sure that I've got this clear, because my own interpretation and my own usage of terms was wrong there. But gratitude, now this is really powerful, because I was once coaching a calling guy, and he said to me, "But when I start a call, I'm actually thinking about how am I going to change the life of this customer and how am I going to feel afterwards. And the opportunity given to me to be able to offer the solution to the customer is what grounds me, boss." And I thought it was funny at that time, but then I actually realized that this is very interesting. This is why they sometimes say, if you're going to always sell, and you're going to get into trouble because you're selling, but if you are serving, you get a different feeling about it. And if you serve and serve for greatness or do some good out of it, then hopefully that gratitude loop that you're referring to is that mechanic that says, I'm going into prospecting call. I may find someone in a bad mood, but I'm grateful because something, something, something. So I think it changes the context. And if you psych yourself the right way, it does make an impact. Gratitude, affirmation. The third one, where we spoke about SMART goals, what exactly is that called? Because I want to update my notes also on this side.
So it's structure. And I use SMART goals as the way to create that structure.
Right. Got it.
If you live in the 24 hours you have right now, that's the premise of the book, Win Your Day. You don't have anything but these 24 hours right now. The past doesn't exist. The future never comes. What you have is right now. And when you focus on living this day to the best of your ability, where the SMART goal is that you're going to do something to complete a goal that you can do today, and as a reward for completing that, you're going to do something for yourself that allows you to replenish yourself for tomorrow, for the next day, for your continued momentum forward. That's the idea behind the SMART goal.
Daily command ritual, I think, is what came to my mind as well when I was going through that. So, and I also was thinking about it. At the end of the day, people ask me, Deepak, how can I lose 40 pounds? And my response is pretty simple. Oh, you have to lose a pound a week. And they look at me like, what does that mean? I'm like, yeah, just don't get caught up with the 40 things you need to do. Get caught up with the next thing you got to do. Now you have to do that 40 more times. Can you do that? So if I were to tell you, I need you to walk 5,000 steps, you're going to freak out, right? But if I tell you that I want you to take one step forward, now take the next step, you will be surprised. So I kind of understand. Sometimes it's like wash, rinse, repeat, right? And my wife always laughs when I talk about wash and repeat. She says, "Look at you. You buy so much shampoo, and I never understood why you buy shampoo, Deepak. But because I do like the ritual of wash and repeat."
Yeah.
Kid you not, I am actually spending a lot of money on shampoo for in the hope that maybe it'll one day bring the follicles back. But anyway, sir, I want to start kind of wrapping up
I
in terms
I
of
had that
this.
problem for a while until I decided to just shave my head.
You just decided, yeah, yeah, yeah. In fact, I pay my barber to find my hair, and it's actually very expensive to find hair, sir. I can guarantee on that one. If I were to talk about identity a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Identity is one of those things that I have got the feeling that the second you say, look, you need to separate your identity from your role, I get this semi glazed look on people's face. What, Jason, would you say to me? How do I craft a identity statement that actually sharpens execution instead of sounding motivational? Something that I don't want to put on a t-shirt, but if it's on the t-shirt, it actually says something powerful. How would you go about helping us that one, right?
Yeah. And again, I'm grateful because this is so important for people to feel a level of confidence. So an identity statement isn't motivation, it's command code. And in the book I write,
Okay.
your phrase must be short, declarative, non-emotional, absolute. It's a verbal trigger, not
Yeah.
an inspiration. So instead of I'm confident, say I decide the pace, as I said before. Instead of I believe, I move first. Insert that physical motion into it. Because again, it serves two purposes. One, when you go from a soft, sort of not really, certain statement to something that you are in command of, now you're going to feel different physically. You're going to feel different emotionally and intellectually because now you're in control of who you are. So, an identity statement is about sharpening your focus and your presence in that moment.
Sir, there's so much there again, right? And I'm actually trying to figure out, do we keep talking for another hour? One of the things that's going to happen, Jason, that most likely when I go through this podcast, I'm going to most likely end up writing like 2 or 3 different newsletters for different audiences, because we started our journey with sales leaders, right? And salespeople. But along the way, it actually became a conversation on humans. And that human could be a role, could be no role, could be unemployed. We don't care. It's about basic fundamentals. And this is not a conversation about living your life in a professional way, but this is about your personal life being lived differently. I really like that. I think there was a lot of leadership lessons here also. But now let's just kind of start asking a very simple question. So in sales, salespeople typically lose a deal when they start forcing outcomes, right? They start getting what I call salesy, right?
Mhm.
And this is where I typically sense, customers leaning back, like, okay, what happened here? Like, look, if you give me the order by Friday, then I can get it at this price. Otherwise, I can't get in this price because I've got 4 other people, barking up my tree and blah 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 blah. There's something you mentioned in the book about directing the day instead of forcing it, right? And I think this is very important for salespeople to understand. Despite what they may believe, it's their brain that leads them to certain conclusions or makes them jump. And I always tell salespeople, rather go to gym and get exercise than jumping to conclusions and getting exercise from that. Not a good idea. How does your idea of directing the day instead of forcing it show up inside a real negotiation between a seller and a buyer? How would you argue through that one for me, sir?
Yeah, that's again such a great question, and thank you for asking. So let's use the gym as a perfect visual. If you go into the gym and you're tired and you know you don't have a lot of energy and your max weight is 150 pounds that you've ever been able to lift, and you decide, I'm going to try and lift 165 pounds today simply because I want to do it. I need to do it. It's in my goals. The reality is, you're most likely not going to get that done because you're forcing it. Force drains energy, direction
Mhm.
channels it. So, as I wrote in the book, stop forcing the day, direct it. In a negotiation, that means lead with presence, not push. That presence is allowing the person to tell you everything that's a problem for them and show them that you are totally aware and present to what they are saying. Let them hear themselves say it. You hold your tone, you hold your breath, you hold your rhythm,
You hold your rhythm.
and you let the room match your signal. Let that person come to you. I hear what you're saying. Listen to yourself. You're saying you've got all these other people at your doorstep offering you everything. I'm here. I'm presenting you with an offer that you like. Tell me about this offer that you like, and what is it you need me to do in order to make this offer work for you?
Got it. Jason, I'm going to actually ask you for something very unique and very different. It just hit me.
Mhm.
So, Jason, I'm a 21-year-old. I have just taken on my first sales job, and someone says to read your book. Your book is very big. I'm 21 years old. I'm been fed on a diet of 100 characters, 20 characters, of little bursts of alacrity, and I do all my assignments with ChatGPT. I have forgotten critical thinking. Which elements of your book do you think would resonate the most with a 21-year-old? And there's a reason for why I'm asking that, because I've very become extremely passionate lately about career progression and mental health, particularly in people who believe in hustle culture, because I've actually realized. And Jason, here's a statistic that just blew my mind. And a lot of people tell me, Deepak, you keep harping on the same thing again and again and again. Yes, because the sun always rises from the east. So it's a universal truth. Saying it doesn't make it lesser. 35% of salespeople leave the sales function by age 35, Jason.
Mhm.
And to me, that is a dramatic metric that shows to you that something is wrong, because I argue salespeople are humanity's best. Resilient people, they take a lot of grief along the way, but they keep coming back, right? And they solve problems. And problem solvers in my book are always noble. That's a noble profession. So, 21-year-old, I'm considering your book, looking at it on a shelf. What would your parting message be for a 21-year-old? Why to pick your book up and how it can help him?
Again, I love the questions that you're asking, and I'm so grateful for it because I wrote the book with that intention that you could pick it up and pick one little segment of any chapter and just focus on that. So for a 21-year-old, you can pick the core lesson. It's just like the liner notes, the core lesson is
Which
literally.
is a great metaphor, because these guys know their Cliff Notes and stuff like that.
That's
So,
exactly right.
yeah.
So you could just take the core lesson of every chapter and that would get you going. What I'll tell you is that the tactics and the reflection questions in every chapter, there's 3 reflection questions. Those are the real nuggets, because as soon as you read those questions or you read that tactic, you're going to want to go back and read the story and say, wait,
Agreed.
how does this apply? Let
How does
me
it apply?
learn how somebody used it.
Yeah.
So it's something where I assume that everybody is going to pick up the book and they're going to scan it. And the goal was that everywhere they scan, they'd find something that would be of value to them at that moment. And they could then pick it up as they need to on a constant basis or on a, inconsistent basis, and always get something that really helped them at that moment to be able to succeed.
To
And
succeed.
that's what the book really was, the intention behind it, being able to provide any reader with the opportunity to gain something at that moment that could help them direct their day.
Perfect, sir. Jason, I have to ask. It's one of those parting questions. There's a lot that we've shared, a lot of information. How do people reach out to you? How do they find you?
Thank you for asking that. So, my website is jasonsafford.com. The book can be found at winyourdaybook.com. You can also find it on my website. You can always find me on LinkedIn. My name is Jason Safford on LinkedIn or Facebook. And my email is very simple. It's my name, jasonsafford@gmail.com.
Jason, that also is a hint to my listeners about your age, because look at that, sir. You got the domain, you got the Gmail address, and there's a Jason Stafford 666 at gmail.com who's right now hating your guts.
You're absolutely right.
Sir, it was a honor and a privilege to actually have this conversation. I always try to bring on guests that'll bring something so unique, so different. I really think we have achieved that agenda. I am going to say goodbye at this point, Jason. Is there anything that you think you really want to get off your chest before we run off into and get back to our daily grind, sir?
Yes, Deepak, I'd love to share with your listeners that crisis doesn't break you, it introduces you to the version that can't. Sales, leadership, parenting, life, they're all furnaces. You either melt or you get made. Crisis enters like an engineer, it clears rot, it exposes weak beams, fire rebuilds your frame. That's the mission. Win your day, then you earn the right to win the world.
You know, Jason, that is so profound. And what was really interesting is that Rumi is a Persian poet, right? And I don't read too much poetry, but there's something he wrote, which was he wrote it from a spiritual context, and he said that when you're hurt or when you're in pain, and when you have this wound, he says, be grateful that you have a wound because it is that wound which will now allow the light to shine through. Now he was talking about God and divinity, right? But I actually looked at that and asked myself, that's very interesting, right? Fire forging, right? It does things to you, it changes you, it hardens you, but you sometimes do want that. And then so I get the point. I really like that, and I think a lot of people need to understand there's a power in metaphors. There's a power, and there's also something very subtle in what you said, guys. It's not all going to be rosy out there, right? The only way that fire can forge you is you got to go through hell. You're going to burn, you're going to be in pain, and that is what makes you stronger. Sir, that's a fitting way to end this conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity given to me, Jason, to bring your book to this light. And I think it's great. We have two suns in our backgrounds as well, so that's pretty more illuminating. Jason, you take care. I'm going to stop recording now. Take care. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, Deepak.